Today we have with us two speakers, Tengku Azian, who is the Director of the Education and KRA at Pemandu. She joined Pemandu in 2010. Prior to that, she was an investment banker. And we also have our second speaker is Elmarie Potgieter, who helped devise the Trust School program here in Malaysia. And she's now an independent education consultant. Before they speak, I just thought it might be worth giving a basic overview of the situation of Malaysian education today, because maybe some people think it's quite easy to reform the system, and I'm not sure it is that easy. First of all, if you take a look at the numbers here, there are more than 10,000 schools in Malaysia. There are nearly 5 million children at school. That's a lot of schools, and that's a lot of children and a lot of teachers. So transforming that system, I think, will be quite a challenge, whatever you want to do. There are obviously a lot of different types of schools as well. So as well as government schools, you also have private schools which teach the national curriculum, an increasing number of international schools, also boarding schools, and some parents are now opting for homeschooling as well. So you have plenty of different types of schools these days as well. So it's about 3% of children who are in the private or international system or non-mainstream schooling, which is actually quite low because in the UK that number is 7%. So obviously we all knew about the PISA in 2009. PISA in 2012 wasn't all that much better. I think maths actually improved a little bit, but reading got worse. So that went below 400 in PISA 2012, and I think we have another PISA which should come out quite soon. So after PISA in 2009, the government introduced its blueprint for education with some key areas, one of which was to raise the standard of English in government schools, which Azian will be talking about in greater detail shortly. One of the other targets was to reach the top third of countries in PISA and TIMSS within 15 years. And then there are also a number of other related initiatives which were kind of not part of the blueprint but were already there. So things like the trust schools, which Elmarie will talk about shortly. And the other issue I think is interesting within Malaysia is Malaysia actually spends quite a lot of money on education. So in the most recent budget, I think the overall figure was 267 billion ringgit, and 16% of that went to education, which is pretty much the same each year, which is more than defence and more than health. So I think the question then becomes, is Malaysia spending its money efficiently when it comes to education? And with that, I think we can hand over to Tengku Azian, who's going to talk about the dual language program, among other things. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I think quite a number of you know me already. And I hope what I'm going to present is something that it's new to you, because the dual language program, which is part of my presentation, is very much in the papers, very much talked about. But I will give a little bit more detail for some of you who may not know as much as others in this room about that program. How do I? So we're just going to load my presentation and then we can start. Right. I was at an Ideas Forum recently and I showed the same exact slide. So I merged two slides into one, because I know some people say, I've seen this slide. Every time we see Pemandu, they show this slide. But yes, we are still on the government transformation program. It hasn't gone away. We're still on it. And there are 7 national key result areas. That's why I'm known as the Director of NKRA Education, which is one of the 7 NKRA under the GTP. So when we started in 2010, we launched the GTP with several quick win initiatives like high performing school, the New Deal, ramping up preschool enrollment, the Linus program, which is trying to ensure every kid by the time he or she is in primary 3 be able to read and write and do arithmetic. And that ended in 2012, and in 2013 we launched the GTP 2.0, which is going to come to an end at the end of this year. So I think what was the good thing about having the education NKRA is that it ignited the imagination of the Malaysian, MOE, Malaysia Education, and what they did was they came out with the Malaysian Education Blueprint, which spans a much wider and longer period from 2013 to 2025. And you know that it has 11 shifts, and very, very good shifts. And underpinning that, there are about 55 key initiatives. So a lot of initiatives that the MOE has introduced under the Malaysian Education Blueprint. Now, there are a number of challenges that we faced under our public education system. That is the reason why we see a number of professional parents and middle-class parents sending their children to private schools, international schools, and that is also the reason why the government liberalized private and international education space, because they knew that there's this pent-up demand for quality education. But I cannot this afternoon cover all the issues that the Malaysian public education system is currently facing. I can only cover 2 areas, and I picked this particular 2 areas because raising the proficiency of English among our students is a topical subject that we see being discussed among us all the time. And every time I'm in Sunway University, Tan Sri Navaratnam brings this up. So I was actually thinking that he would be in the audience, but he's not. But he would love that I am raising this issue, because I saw in today's Sun, there's a letter to the editor from no less than Tan Sri Navaratnam. Okay? And then the other issue is to raise the quality of our teachers, because I think they make a big difference to student outcome. I was talking to Dr. Yunus Yassin, who is from ASTI yesterday, and he says teachers contribute 70% to the student outcome. And maybe some of you believe that, maybe some of you don't, but that's what he mentioned to me. And if we have time, we'll talk about developing students with high order thinking skills. So let's go through the first one. Now, let's be honest. Malaysia is a small trading nation. Small trading nation, and trade as a percentage of gross domestic product, GDP, is at 150%. Okay? So if we are a trading nation, and we have been as far back as the 16th century, where we had the Chinese, the Arab traders coming to Malaya, or whatever that you call them then, that is the reason why English is very important, because it is the international language of commerce. Now look at other countries where the trade percentage GDP is much lower, like China, Indonesia, Japan. They don't really need to master English because they rely heavily on their domestic market. In fact, China, I think it's going, they're going to concentrate their resources instead of becoming the country where they export goods for the rest of the country, the rest of the world. They are actually going to depend on their domestic market increasingly. We are also now part of ASEAN, a very exciting step. And like the EU, we will have a lot of labor mobility. If you go to the UK, you see a lot of Poles in the UK becoming doctors, plumbers, etc., etc. We bring lots of skills into the UK. We will see the same thing as well. We will see Thais, Indonesians, Indonesians are already here, but Thais, Cambodians, Vietnamese coming here. And why not let Malaysians also tap opportunities in the ASEAN market? But again, we must master the language of commerce in the international arena. If we are to tap the advantage of ASEAN, which is the 3rd largest economy in Asia after China and Japan, with a population of 633 million people. So where are we in terms of English proficiency? 25% of our students fail in English at UPSR level, 23% at PMR, but now PMR has been replaced, school-based assessment, 22% at SPM, 50% fail at 1119, and even at MOET, when they sit for MOET to go into higher education institutions, 62% score at band 1 and 2. And that is the reason why we have so many Malaysians, when they graduate from higher education institutions, not being able to secure jobs in the market. So none of this surprised us. So I'd like to go a little bit deeper on that data. We can see high failure rates in English compared to Bahasa Melayu, where the failure rate is below 10%. So it's at single digit. And in fact, the failure rate in English is even higher than the failure rate of math and science, where the top students, the excellent, if you look at the excellent grades, it's much more apparent in mathematics, in BM, and science compared to English. This is also the reason why MOE, Ministry of Education, postpone the imposition of the policy that pass in English would have to be made compulsory at SPM level. And I think a lot of people were very unhappy when the government reversed that decision, because they said, not reversed, I correct myself, postpone that decision. And because they said, look, when are you going to start? Just allow the cohort to fail, and then the system will work hard to correct itself. But if you continuously, have that safety net, it doesn't improve itself. And I think there's some merit in that argument, but MOE at this stage doesn't feel they're ready to take that bold step, because 100,000 children will leave the school system without any form of certification if that policy was imposed in 2016. So let's look at the MOET results. We can see 62% are at band 1 and 2, and only 1% proficient. But we made a very bold announcement. We said that the minimum requirement MOET for entry into public universities in 2015, arts and social science is at band 3, STEM subjects band 4, and law medicine at band 5. And I'm not entirely sure that they enforce this strictly. I suspect not, right? I see some heads shaking at the back. I think some flexibility is given, but it's there. And I think over time, universities are expected to impose these entry requirements more strictly. I'm not sure what's the position in Sunway. Anybody got any answers in Sunway? Do you enforce this strictly?
We don't use MOET.
You don't use MOET. You have some other entry. So this is only for public universities. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. There is this policy called MBM MBI that replaced PPSMI, and some of you say, what is this MBM MBI? It's mempertabatkan bahasa Malaysia dan mengukuhkan bahasa Inggeris. In short, it's to uphold the bahasa Malaysia and to strengthen the English language. And there are a number of programs under this MBM MBI umbrella, and some of you may know them, like the Native English Speakers Program. Very controversial because the government spends hundreds of millions on it, bringing all this mat saleh, blue-eyed teachers to the school system. Outcomes, not clear, question mark. I think they're putting to the end of it because of deep budget cuts, by the way. Pro-ELT is the upskilling our English teachers. English Teaching Assistant Program is together with the Fulbright program, the Linus 2.0, Ops English, SISE Plus is School Improvement Specialist Coach Program, PITO, blah, blah, blah. I think you've seen all this. There are 23 initiatives under the MBM MBI programs. And I can tell you, for those who complain that the quality of teaching and learning of English is poor, the majority, 90% of the funds under MBM MBI are for English programs. So actually the Malay group are actually complaining because they're saying the MBM group are saying they only get a sliver of the MBM MBI budget. So Pemandu, when we came in, we started off with Linus because it's very, very important. We don't want to hear horror stories 11 years from now saying, after our Linus program has been launched, saying that, you know, our kids, after 11 years of school, they can't speak, write, and, you know, and do arithmetic. So the Linus program is to arrest that. And we started that with numeracy and BM in 2010, and in 2013, we introduced the English. ProL is a very large-scale upskilling of our English teachers. And I bring this up because I still read the papers and I hear and I read letters to the editors saying, our English teachers are not up to mark. What's the government doing about training our English teachers? They're very, very serious about training our English teachers. And I will tell you a little bit more about that. And of course, our latest buzzword, HIP, yes, MOE is being transformed into a very hip ministry and the dual language program. Shall I stop there and until the next one? All right. Technology can never underestimate. Now, when I showed this slide to World Bank, and every time I see them, they talk about this because they actually want me to go to Chile next year just to talk about this. They said that this is the boldest thing any government has done anywhere in the world. And I was surprised. They asked me, how did you manage to get 60,000 English teachers in the country to sit, not an MOE test, to sit for an international test that's benchmarked or mapped on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages? How did you get 60,000? Well, it helps that our civil servants are highly obedient, so they did it. But there was a lot of pain points. A lot of them were very unhappy. And we had, you know, English teachers, and I think, you know, you can attest to this, saying, I have been marking papers the last 30 years and you expect me to sit for this test? I have been an English teacher, a guru Cermelang, and you asked me to sit for this test? But MOE said, you have to, because we cannot say, oh, you're a guru Cermelang, you don't have to sit for this test. You are an assessor, you don't need to sit for this test. Because by the time you do that, you probably only end up with 1,000 teachers that need to be tested. Sorry,
what test is this?
Now, they said originally for the Cambridge placement test. But that just set up the baseline. And from the baseline, we then identified approximately 25,000 teachers that perform not so good. They had to sit another set of tests called the Aptis Test, which is actually prepared, invigilated by British Council. So those people there in your room, you think, oh, MOE cheated. MOE wasn't even in the room. It was conducted by British Council on all 25,000 teachers, invigilated by British Council, so it's a very fair test, okay? And from the test, we then upskilled the teachers, and you can see that from 2012 to 2014, a lot of them moved into the higher bands. So A is bad, by the way. So it's not like a school grade. A is bad, minimum proficiency, and this is really the highest proficiency under the Common European Framework or Reference for Languages. So we can see the teachers are moving up. So 15,500 of our English teachers have been upskilled over a period of 1 year by British Council, and another 7,000 will be upskilled this end of this year and next year. And this is what they did. This was prepared by British Council. 240 hours in the classroom. Most of them attended classes, English classes after school, once a week. And then 240 hours, it was an online learning, so there were online teachers to support them. And at the end of the 1 year course, they had to be retested again. So they were tested pre-course and tested again post-course. So some teachers were tested 3 times. Cambridge placement test, that was the baseline for the ministry, the Aptis test before they started the course, and the Aptis test after they finished the course. Can you imagine that 3 times you're tested, and you could be a teacher that's been teaching for 20 years? So I applaud the English teachers in the country for doing this. And a number of them in the school had a very hard time because the math and science teachers would say, gosh, you failed. You did badly under Aptis. You know, you have to go for a course. I'm a science teacher, a math teacher. I don't have to go for this course. Hooray, I'm wonderful. So I think we have to really give them credit. And we wanted to take them from B1, those who were at B1, intermediate level, to B2, and those that were B2 want to bring them up to C1. Yeah. And this is the result. That's why I said that I actually like ProElt, because you can measure the outcome. So after they sat for the test, 90.8% of our B1 teachers improved at least one proficiency band. That means they moved to B2. And 42.2% B2 teachers moved to C1. That was for cohort 1. And we saw a similar, perhaps slightly not so great result for the B1 teachers, but we saw them moving at least one band. It is very, very difficult to move from B2 to C1 because C1 is really native English proficiency. Am I correct? Yeah. Okay. So, as most of you know, and got really quite excited, the PM made a key announcement, implementation of dual language program and highly immersive program, and budgeted 38.5 million 2016 budget for it, and said that it would start with 300 schools. And we've seen different reaction from Malaysians. The key thing is that we went on the MBI platform. We didn't want to come across as introducing a new policy. We said, let's leverage on the MBI policy, but it's just two new programs. But for some of you thinking that, you know, gosh, this is a no-brainer, I could have done this overnight. I want to show you the process of arriving at that point. First of all, Pemandu had a 2-week lab from 1st June to 12th June to sort of identify the key issues and develop high-level solution. And we then, at that time, presented it to Tan Sri Muhyiddin, then the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Education, to say, can we move to the next stage? And he said, yes, you can proceed with the 3-feet implementation. And we had another lab from 29th June to 10th July. And then we ran a survey. Can I have, put your hands up? Can I see some people are sort of nodding off? How many of you did the survey? Put your hands up. Oh. How many of you did the survey more than once? So nobody admitted they did the survey. Some people did tell me I did the survey 3 times. Okay. And then we came up with a video. We're going to show one of them. Have you all seen the video? All of you seen the video? No. Okay, I'll show the video. We had 3. One was in English. The other 2 was in Malay. And it was deliberately done in Malay because we wanted to address the Malay community that would feel threatened or with some unease with the implementation of DLP. So if some of you look at those 2 other videos and say, why is it Malay-centric? It is to appeal to the community and say, look, you've got to do something about it. Let's not talk about language. Let's not talk about BM against English. It is not a zero-sum game. It is not about English at the expense of Malay. It is why can't we succeed in 2 languages or 3 languages or 10 languages? We can succeed when we acquire more than 1 language. And then in our lab, we had multiple stakeholders like Teach for Malaysia. We had FMM, Federation Malaysian Manufacturers, MEF, Khazanah, Page, Yayasan Amir, Peneraju. We had all these people and MOE folks. So the ideas were developed by MOE. Pemandu is often accused of coming up with ideas, and they say, you are not an educationist, and you come up with ideas and plans, what do you know? Actually, we didn't develop the ideas. We just facilitated the discussion and come up with beautiful PowerPoint. That's all we did, okay? So I got to correct that perception. And we ran a survey. Oops, what happened? And we ran a survey, and actually I have so much data to mine, but I'm just going to show a few. To the question, would you consider some subjects in school to be taught another language beside BM? 96.2% of you said yes. Which language would be your preferred choice if the answer was yes? 94% said English. We gave Mandarin and Tamil as options as well, by the way. To the question, if English is used as a language to teach other subjects, what subjects should be taught in that language? And 62.4% said science and mathematics and ICT, and 38.2% said all of the above, including humanities. So you all, the 38.2% wanted English medium schools. So we did not choose math and science. You chose math and science, you, the Rakyat. So that survey was very powerful because you gave feedback to us to come up with the decision that we needed to make. And these were the reasons why you thought that it's very important to be able to acquire proficiency in English, because it would improve a student's employability. Students were able to access resources such as books and library, more effective in accessing the internet. Only 3.4% felt that English language should not be the medium of instruction to teach other subjects. We came up with 3 powerful videos. Oh, sorry, I didn't show that. Huh? Okay, sorry about that. 3 powerful videos. The first one that you see with the boy is actually done in English, the other 2 in BM, and it's on YouTube, so you can go and watch it. But I will show one, the one that is English. So can we have the video on? Can we lower the lights? No, it's all right. Yeah.
Everybody in Malaysia should realize that English is very important.
So English does help by, in a way, expanding the horizons, not just on that subject that I'm researching on, but it also helps me relate to other subjects in ways that I might not even think of.
Standard of English in school is not that good yet, because most of the students, they converse in Chinese, because most of us are Chinese.
My classmates, if I talk in English, they'll be like, "Oh, come on, stop." So
if you want your child to do big things, give them the correct tools, give them the correct language so that they can find information, find knowledge easier.
like a few years ago, they used to teach math and science and English, and it was very easy to understand. Everything was very simple. It's very complicated when you translate something from English to Malay. It becomes longer and more winding, the words, the sentences.
It's a very big concern because as a secondary school teacher, you expect them to come with the basics.
To actually write proper 350 words in SPM is a disaster for some of our students. Like I told you, the basic grammar, the grasp of the grammar is not there.
I find that the local student, even though academically they are doing well, they can have a CGP of 3.6, 3.4 out of 4, but English become their stumbling block. They can't even write proper analytical report.
Maybe you'd like to introduce yourself. My name is Elle.
讲你的名字，讲几岁，讲什么班，3个同学吧，英文啊。
会讲
What's your favorite subject in school?
讲话
I think I have a lot of language. English is my salah.
Can you make me what? Belajar kat luar negara.
They need someone to actually bring in the idea and then they will realize that English has to be improved in the community.
I think it's important for kids to realize that they are actually assets to the country.
That's the challenge as a teacher, English teacher here. We try to change their mindset.
For Linus class, even to get 1% to read takes a lot of patience.
It's not easy, and you go to class with 40 pupils. Sometimes you say, oh my God, please help me. And I enter the school area, I pray, help me.
When we think about our country, future, the future of our country, the future of our students. We're very sad to see that many of our students, when they finish school, they cannot even speak in English.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can we have the lights on again? Okay. The other two videos are on YouTube, and I'm going to watch it. The Prime Minister, we showed one of the Malay-centric videos to the Prime Minister, but this one was seen by Tan Sri Muhyiddin when he gave us, after he saw that, he gave us the green light to do the second phase of the lab, which is to come up with a 3-feet plan for the DLP and HIP. So what is HIP? HIP is the acronym for Highly Immersive Program, and it is not anything new, because in 1999, MOE actually came out with a circular and said, schools, you can run activities in English, whether it's in the classroom, outside the classroom, after school hours. But it was a one-shoe-fits-all kind of a circular, and there was no support given to the school. The school was supposed to just run it on their own. And that's why we see mixed results. Some very, very good schools do HIP very well. Some interior schools don't do HIP at all. So we're going to try to redo it in a different way, whereby we're going to say, look, schools can do activities based on what they're comfortable with and ramp it up over time. And we're going to start with 94 schools. By the end of 2016, we'll have 1,000, and by 2018, all 10,000 schools will have HIP in one form or another. So we're going to give a toolkit for the school to do a real reflection and self-assessment together with the other members of the school community. That includes the PIBG, the teachers, and then to decide on the activities they would roll out in the school. So there are 4 key stakeholders that must be involved for HIP to be successful. One is the principal that will lead the HIP activity in school. The teachers will have to do it. We have most number of teachers in the schools, right? The parents must find out how they can support by either participating or facilitating those activities together with the teacher, and even to bring in the community, like graduates, into the school. And that you can do this, as I mentioned, in the classroom, outside the classroom, extra classes, or even outreach program. And there are many best practices. And I give you an example of the school in Greek. Not even one of those KL schools. 330 students in a primary school, parents from low to medium income. But the headmaster is highly motivated. He communicates in English with the students. He says, good morning, how are you, Just simple things like this, by introducing the vocabulary and making it comfortable for kids to converse in English, so that we don't have that scenario of that Malay girl when she said, kau Melayu jadi cakaplah Melayu, So you don't get that. Or janganlah cakap bahasa penjajah, or worse, jangan cakap bahasa kafir. We don't want that sort of conversation in the school. We want English to be, something that you do because it's good, because it gets you far in life. Weekly school assembly around English, you have lots and lots of activities. So we will have these best practices to inspire the schools, which are mainly bands 4, 5, and 6, and 7 schools, to adopt HIP and embrace HIP. Now, for the other schools, we have 300 schools that we are targeting for dual language program, where the schools, unlike PPSMI, which was a top-down approach, this is a bottom-up approach. The schools are given the choice to offer the teaching and learning of science, mathematics, ICT, and design technology in dual languages, BM and English. So BM is still the language, the medium of instruction in our school. It's the default language. But if parents say, I would like to take the risk of my child learning mathematics and science in English, so you can inform your school, and the school, for the pilot project, must demonstrate 4 things: that the teachers are ready, the school leadership is ready, parents agree to it, and this is the one that the KPPM or the DG imposed recently, the grade point average for Bahasa Melayu must be at or above the national average. That means for UPSR for primary schools and SPM in secondary schools. So we're piloting with 300, and the announcement will be out this week, 300 schools, and schools that are not on the list, I believe, will be able to appeal. So maybe when we start the school year on 4th of January 2016, we will have more than 300 schools, maybe 400 schools. I'm not sure. But even at 300 to 400, we're only talking about 3 to 4% of schools in the country. So HIP is very, very important. In 2017, DLP will be open to all schools if they can meet these 4 criteria. All schools. So we have 1 year, ladies and gentlemen, 1 year for schools to get ready. So I hope if you are in PIBG or you have influence with PIBG, please, if your child's school is not a DLP school, in the list that's going to be announced this week, you must start preparing the school. You have 1 year to do that, so that it can be a DLP school in 2017. So that circular is going to come out this week. Next year, the 300 pilot school will start with primary 1, primary 4, and form 1. The reason why we want primary 1 is we want to have a fresh cohort. Why do we want to have a primary 4? Because we need to have the feedstock for the secondary school. And also after 3 years of learning math and science in BM, we don't think it will be that difficult for children in these identified pilot DLP schools to make the transition to English in primary 4. And Form 1, we need to start because, again, it's a fresh cohort for the secondary schools. But in the school, if the school is capable and you have teachers and you have support from parents, all classes can be done all in those subjects in English. But if there are some parents, 15 parents object and say, you know what, my child has been learning standard 1, 2, and 3 in BM, and I want him to continue to learn in BM in standard 4, you must open the class in BM, okay? Oh, sorry, I'm moving far too slowly. Okay, I'm just going to finish the English and we'll talk about the teachers. And why, people said, why did you not improve the teaching of English in the classroom? Because the exposure time to the English language is very limited. And yet, when you go to Sunway College to do your A-levels or your matriculation, your STPM, if you do a science subject, your exposure is 90% or more. If you go to university, if you do medicine, law, other subjects. So how is the child going to make that big leap if you don't introduce more subjects in English? There is also a revolution happening in Tamil schools. You all know that yesterday in Malay Mail, Tamil school won a science competition in Hong Kong. They've won in South Korea, Beijing. This is a lot to do with Dr. Yunus, who started his work with ASTI 13 years ago. And that is because all his programs are conducted in English. And he gave me a very important message. And he said, results cannot be seen immediately. We must be patient. We must see the program through over a long period of time before we see the results. But we must stay on the course. So I hope with the DLP, well, I will make sure the DLP will stay on the course so that we will see tangible results 5, 6 years down the line. And for people who say, hey, and I know some of you will say that, look at countries like Germany, Korea, China, they don't need English. Let's ponder on this. Article, 90% of scientific literature is published in English. Even the Chinese, Japanese, Russian scientists have given up. They've given up the battle. They're now writing in English. Honda announced this year, Honda, an iconic brand from Japan, has admitted now the lingua franca of that corporation should be in English. So really, in a way, we have to embrace this. So for those people who say to you, you know, look at countries, you just have to tell them, look, enough of this conversation, we're just going round and round in circles. Look, even the French, the Germans, the Koreans, the Chinese have admitted English is the way forward. And if we want to make Bahasa Melayu an important language, and why not? Then we have to work much harder to publish literature, scientific journals in BM and translate. If it comes out in the UK yesterday, it must be translated at the end of this week. We must work much harder. It cannot just be about rhetoric. So these are some of the challenges: how to ramp up, how to scale up, teachers' readiness, the GPMP in Bahasa Melayu. So schools that want to become DLP schools, you need to work on this. And I hope you all as parents, in one way or the other, will support schools. So something happened, and I hope this message you will get this message. Actually, the government has not just launched DLP. They have actually launched something very powerful. They've introduced the concept of choice. Now, I think that's probably something that hasn't registered in the mind of Malaysians. They're saying the school community sit down and decide whether they want to do DLP or not. They're empowering schools to decide and plan how they are going to deliver DLP. And I have really great schools like Sekolah Kebangsaan Taman Mega who said, oh, you know, we have 100% support from our parents. And some parents are objecting to it because they say their kids cannot manage. And we are getting some parents to tutor those kids so that they can catch up. Isn't that wonderful when I got that WhatsApp from the principal of that school? So parents are saying, let's help the Ministry of Education, because education does not lie entirely in the hands of the government. It lies in your hands as well. Okay, I think the next topic is actually to raise the quality of teachers in the school system. And I have a few slides on that, but I think I've taken up too much time. All right, so let me take a breather for a while, okay?
Our next speaker is Elmarie Potgieter. So she's an independent education consultant and helped set up the Trust School program here in Malaysia.
That was a very, very interesting talk. I was making copious notes, and thank you very much for sharing all that information. And as I was listening to our previous speaker, I was making the connections to the trust schools. So I was quite delighted to see that in many ways, I think some of the things happening in the trust schools, we're a little bit ahead of some of these initiatives, and it really is complementary, so that's great. Today is my first day. Yesterday I ended my employment with Leap Ed Services as General Manager of Education, where I've been for 5 years, and I've stepped out into the world, taking this risk to spread the learning of the past 5 years. So it's a wonderful opportunity to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to share with you a little bit about the trust schools and the philosophy, the design, and talk about why this is an initiative that is working. And I'm also going to make a few suggestions on what I think needs to be done to improve, scale it up, and share this learning in the wider community. Let's work this out. So I think it's important to just reflect on what the intention of this Trust School program is. An PPSOMA operational management agreement was signed between Khazanah Nasional, Yayasan Amir, and the Ministry of Education in 2010 in an attempt by Khazanah to work on producing or developing talent for the Malaysian economy. That was the whole drive behind this project, and it is a PPP, a public-private partnership, where, as per design, the corporate sector would sponsor the intervention in the schools, while the ministry still retain ownership of the schools, pay the salaries of the teachers, and that's where that partnership idea comes in. So if you look at the vision of the trust schools, you will see one of the words that I've highlighted is equitable access to excellent education. So trust schools currently are operating in all kinds of schools all over the country, from Orang Asli schools, Band 6 schools in Felda areas, to high-performing schools, with this year MCKK and TKC also joining in as trust schools, which some people do question and say, well, why don't you just focus your energy on the Band 6 schools or the Band 5 schools? But at the same time, as when we go into the high-performing schools, we also find the same kind of problems in teaching and learning. So that is how the schools are now spread all over the country. So it's about equitable access to quality education for all children. And how do we do this? So just quickly, currently there are 62 trust schools. Started in 2010 with a first cohort of 10 schools, 5 in Johor Bahru and 5 in Sarawak. And now this year we have 62 schools and the project is growing. But of course, scalability is limited by sponsorship. It's not an affordable program. It is expensive. It costs roughly 3 million ringgit for a period of 5 years intervention in a school. And the growth is limited by, of course, how many companies are willing to step forward and to sponsor these schools. The trajectory in the blueprint is that there will be 500 trust schools by 2025. Now, I think it pales into significance if you look at the numbers, more than 10,000 schools in Malaysia, and people always say, well, you know, it's a drop in the bucket. What does it mean? How does it change the whole entire education system if you have only such a few schools? But I think the beauty of the trust schools is being that it's proven to the skeptics that it actually is possible to transform teaching and learning in a Malaysian public school, because those schools have become beacons of excellence and are laboratories of change. So just a few key facts about the trust schools. As I've said to you now, it's a PPP project, but it still is a Kementerian Malaysian Education Ministry project. These schools are fully ministry schools. We're delivering the Ministry of Education curriculum. No more teachers are given, no more money is invested in the schools. In the beginning, the first year, teachers were expecting great investments, you know, Khazanah Nasional, and they were just ready to, you know, have their new classrooms built and, you know, improve the premises and everybody will have computers. That's not where the investment went. The investment is in putting full-time, I don't know why this happens, putting full-time education advisors in the schools for 3 years of the project. So let's go to the next one. I thought I'd identify a few principles that underlines this program. The first thing is that people say, is this sustainable? And I'm always asked, what after 5 years? What happens after 5 years when advisors leave the schools? Well, actually, the advisors leave the school after 3 years in the 5-year program. And I worked in the Emirates with the Abu Dhabi government for a significant period of time in a similar transformation program. And one of the lessons that I learned from that project was the whole sustainability factor. So when I designed this program, I underpinned it or built it on a gradual release of responsibility model, which is actually a literacy acquisition model. But based on the first 2 years of intervention, which is the transforming years, lots of input, lots of professional development, modeling in the classrooms, establishing systems and embedding school improvement practices in the school. And then you reduce the support, step back and let the teachers in the school run the project independently with just some coaching and some feedback and intervention, so that by the end of the 5th year, they can be integrated back into the system. And the gradual release model also works on a micro level, where the advisors in the school then intervenes and works with particular teachers, building that capacity for them to take the lead. Another thing is that within the trust schools, it's underpinned by 7 pedagogical pillars. Oh, people love that, right? The pillars of this and the pillars of that. But it's best practices, research that we did on what pedagogies really change teaching and learning outcomes for the students. So we've identified 7 of these pillars that the teachers are assessed at the beginning of the intervention. So when we enter the schools, all teachers are assessed against these competencies and get a baseline scores. And you will find it really interesting that even in the high-performing schools, on a scale of 5, we have found that as many as 33 out of 60 teachers are only on band 1 in the initial assessment. When you start looking at collaborative learning, assessment for learning, differentiation, application of thinking skills, the positive learning environment, the reflective practices of the teachers. So when you take away all those memorizing and extra lessons after school and you strip that away and you say, is good teaching and learning happening in the classroom? Very seldom is it that we will find teachers, and I think it's a very, very solid point. It is about the teachers. So people ask, why don't we work with the students? Well, it's that whole philosophy of teaching a person to catch a fish. It's no use that we go in and train the teachers, the students. It's the role of the teacher, and it have to build that capacity because they have to create those learning opportunities for the children. They are the ones who create those opportunities for children to own their own learning and handing the learning over to the students, which is one of the most difficult things I think in Malaysia for teachers to do. Because they are afraid. Their success is measured by the student's performance in the exam. Parents' success is measured by their children's performance in the exam. The community is built, in entrance or access to universities is based on the exam results. And even in the trust schools, we are working, the team has been working, I've been leading this initiative to design an outcomes measure that looks at the holistic development of the child, looking at the 6 aspirations of the blueprint: leadership, ethics and spirituality, national identity. But at the end of the day, do people really want to know what's that profile? They still ask, how much, what's the grade, how many A's? And you go into most Malaysian public schools, and the first thing you will see when you enter the school at the beginning of the year is a big banner. I don't know if you've seen this, and it says 298 days, still UPSR. And it still dominates the culture. So how do you get past that? Well, one of the things that I've been saying since I've arrived here was, if people then base their success on the exam, change the exam. Make the exam an exam that requires thinking skills. Look at your assessment and change that, and that will then drive the system to change, and which is what the government is now doing. Not that I said, it's not because of me, I'm not trying to say that, but it's fantastic to see that those changes are happening. Right, so the principles, I've mentioned the pedagogical pillars, but one thing that's really important is also understanding how adults learn. What are those learning needs? And Tengku also spoke about the top-down approach. You've got to give people ownership of their own learning. You've got to give them choice. You've got to give them the opportunity to feel that they are the ones that are driving their own learning and develop a love for ongoing learning. So that is something that is important. Another bit that is really important is that it's really about stakeholder engagement, and that's another thing that you showed. You cannot transform a school if you don't have buy-in from your biggest client, which is your student, your parent, the community around the school, the teachers, the leadership, and also the business community, and also relationships with the local PPDs and JPN. The Trust School program rests on these standards that I developed, or the team developed, and they're very robust, and they are monitored and measured. So that's also important. Schools have targets, and the progress is measured on a monthly basis. Those 4 standards, and it echoes your slide, Tengku, leadership. No school can outperform the quality of its leaders. So it's really important, and that is Michael Fullen, the McKinsey report. It's supported by such extensive research. Leadership is really important, but it's distributed leadership. It's not just the principal. It's the leadership that sits with the teachers. It's the leadership that sits with children. But ultimately, your senior leadership team is really important. And this is where it is important that leaders in this country, in schools, are selected based on their abilities, their competencies, and not on tenure. Because unfortunately, so often in schools, the principal becomes a principal after years of moving through the system, and very often is at the end of their educational career. So what's happened in the trust schools, and if we talk about sustainability, is you invest so much money and so much time in raising people's understanding of their role as educational leader in the school, as mentor, as coach, as driver of transformation, and then they retire. Or, as what happened in Johor with the cohort 1, which is the first 5 schools, in last year we lost 95% of the senior leadership team of the schools. So a school, and anybody that studies educational transformation will know, I mean, you can survive the loss of your principal because it's natural. People get old, they retire, they move on, but 95% of your senior leadership team, PK1, PK him, PK Coco, principal. So how do you sustain change in a school if these people are transferred out to other schools, or, yes, retirement you can't do anything about unless you promote people who are skilled into the job? Unfortunately, it's difficult. And I think the blueprint also has, I know the blueprint has also identified that as one of the important shifts, is appointing people with the right talent and changing the system. So what you find is often you have a fantastic head of department, or you have a brilliant PK him, for example, but that person can't be appointed as a principal. They must first be a PK him, then they must become a PK1, and then they can become a PK a GB. So there are things in the system, but I know that the ministry is working on that, and that's fantastic. Those are the 4 areas. It takes a village to educate a child, to use that old saying, but that is really true. And transformation in the schools does not work if we don't have all 4 of those elements present. This is the holistic transformation. The leadership of the school needs to know about systemic change. They need to understand school improvement. They need to be able to recognize good teaching and learning. They have to be out there in the classrooms and really give feedback to the teachers. They have to monitor. They have to drive school improvement. They have to also work on sustainability and talent development. At the same time, your teachers need to develop their own leadership skills, need to own the learning, and need to work collaboratively as a community, which is what is happening in the trust schools. So one of the key factors that support change in the trust schools is the building of capacity. I think it's some of the most important work that we've done is actually strengthening the middle leaders in the school. So the PK hymns, the panel heads, the heads of department, as well as a new role that we've created called the advisory teacher, who is a coach. Because training and professional development within the four walls of your school is the best form of professional development. So once you build the capacity of in-school coaches to do peer observations, to do modeling, to work in professional learning communities that's driven by the needs of the students, sustainability is guaranteed. If the leaders of the school leave, the core is still there. The head of department suddenly is responsible for the professional development of her teachers. They do the data analysis. They give feedback and input into the school improvement plans. They are held accountable for the progress of the teachers in their departments, which is very different from the way in which things have been done in many schools. So what you will see there is a few points that are really important. I've already mentioned to you, is that me? Sorry. That there's this baseline assessment that's done of all teachers at the beginning of the year. And then they have their rubrics that show them what are the different steps and the different stages in development that they've got to aspire to. They are given in-school professional development. We have written programs like Teach Smart, the Mid-Lit program. There's a financial literacy program. And now we will also be launching critical reading in English, maths and science in the schools. But they then know what their targets are. And the performance management committee in the school is really strong, and it celebrates the improvement of teachers. It is a positive culture where we catch teachers doing things right instead of doing things wrong. It is about celebrating the success. It is about learning from one another, and it is about monitoring and improvement plans for those teachers that are not making the necessary progress. A key element is also, as I've mentioned, our professional learning communities that are not just meetings. They are really communities that are driven by the learning needs of the students. So a professional development training session for the whole school is delivered after school. 2 hours, Teach Smart. Everybody must attend, even the senior leadership team. Then the teachers are given an intersessional task that they've got to work on. They meet in their professional learning communities in between, where they discuss, share, and look at the progress and which of these strategies are working or not working. And at the end, they reflect on their progress that they've made in that 6 weeks period in between the training. Then another thing that's important is the cross-curricular elements. So teachers are encouraged to link the learning across subjects, to work thematically, to also collaborate and have programs with a PK co-curriculum so that the learning is extended outside of the classroom and the learning becomes real. Because when learning is real, students really can embed and connect with it. And then, of course, I've also got the last one there, and that is that teachers are expected to become professional researchers. They have to do action research. And you know what? The pride, their own pride in the teaching profession is restored. And that's something that we see in the schools. Just a little bit about the Trust School program. As you can see, the sustainability element is built into the phases of transforming, solidifying, and transitioning. And it's in the last 2 years of transitioning that we really encourage the involvement of the local district officers. I did this very complicated diagram, and don't try to even read it, but I wanted to show you this to show how intricate and how complicated it all is. At the heart of this sits, there's a thing here, sits the 21st century learners. Now, this is very controversial. What is a 21st century learner? Is it the 4 C's? Is it the 5 C's? Does it involve digital technology? But if we take the sort of more accepted, widespread use of the 4 C's as for students as critical thinkers, collaborators, creators, and communicators, it sits in the center of the Trust School approach to teaching and learning. Surrounded also by the link to the Malaysian Education Blueprint and the 6 aspirational areas. So teachers in their planning have to identify what are they doing, even in the maths class, to improve communication. Are they promoting collaboration? Yes, because in trust schools, all teachers are supposed to integrate and use cooperative learning structures in every single lesson. That's something I'm extremely passionate about. It transforms learning immediately. It costs nothing. It encourages communication, language use. The 4 C's, the 4 elements of English or language, the writing, the reading, the speaking, the listening, happens in those collaborative communities. The children work together. They solve problems together. They develop leadership skills together. And it immediately changes the levels of engagement in the classroom. So that is a non-negotiable element of the trust schools. But at the same time, what are you doing for thinking skills? What is the big question in every lesson? What strategies are you using to promote and scaffold the thinking for the children? Are you using good questioning skills? Are you using visual maps? Are you concentrating on the concepts rather than the content? Around this sits the pedagogical pillars of the trust schools. And one of the elements I want to highlight is the positive emotional and physical environment. Another thing I'm passionate about, and that's why this is in the program. I believe every teacher in Malaysia should learn about how the brain learns. So here's my question to you. If you want to fix your car, you take it to a mechanic, right? You have a toothache, you go to a dentist. If you want to learn about the brain and how learning happens in the brain, will you ask a teacher? I wonder how many teachers actually know how language acquisition happens in the brain, understands what the role is of emotions and how emotions affect learning. And once teachers know about the brain and they know that a student can't concentrate for more than 2 minutes, their age plus 2 minutes to a maximum of 14 minutes, well, not talk all the time. So we're not really being good models here. As I say, adults can concentrate for 14 minutes and that's it. So I think we've lost you a long time ago. But it's so important. And it's so important to promote emotional intelligence. The research is so strong. They've done a study recently in Singapore and Malaysia amongst CEOs of companies. 1,700 not only CEOs, but senior leaders in companies. 1,700 did the emotional intelligence test. And they found a 70% correlation between successful companies and CEOs with a high emotional intelligence quotient. The research shows, without any doubt, that children with high emotional intelligence perform better academically because they can deal with emotional issues. So we know the pressures of teenage hormonal change and the peer pressure. And today our children are exposed to online cyberbullying. They experience so much emotional stress. And if we teach them how to navigate through emotions, if we teach them how to manage relationships, the results improve. So in trust schools, we believe in cultivating a positive emotional and physical environment. And I think that is something that hopefully will spill out into the environment, because we also now have a new project called Prestasi, that's project Transformasi, in which we are training 400 Ministry of Education principals and coaches of the IAB and IPG to work to implement this program in 100 schools across 100 PPDs nationwide. And the same principles are being implemented there. Yeah, I'm going to finish. So I'm almost done. And I thought I'll just show you a few photos. So what do you see? In trust schools, you will always see children using mini whiteboards, visual learning strategies, and of course, the ever-present cooperative learning strategies. Now, what you will see in this photograph is, here's the teacher engaging with a student, giving immediate feedback, working with that group. But over there, you can see students are working independently. So nothing amazing. You don't see amazing things. You see a normal school, normal desks, normal teacher, but the learning students are engaged and encouraged. This is a primary school, band 5. When we start, no, band 6 when we started, they jumped 2 bands to band 4 in 3 years. In a rural school area, I'm not going to identify the school, but again, look at the learning environment. You will see real plants in the class because the teacher is doing a cross-curricular unit. If you go and you look at the displays, you will see the positive engagement. And that is a parent. The parent came in to help with reading. So it's possible to do this. Another one, you will again see the teacher engaging with a small group of students who are using visual learning or using kinesthetic methodology. And of course, look where the teacher is, on his knees, on the floor, engaging with a small group of students. Peer learning, cooperative learning is an integral part of the work in schools. Again, this was a band 6 school that we started with in 2011. And again, you will see all those elements in the class. Students doing thinking skills, working collaboratively, and where's the teacher? Not talking in front. The students are managing their own learning. So, I've basically talked about this. I'm going to end with this slide. Even though we are now in what we can call education 2.0, where knowledge is shared, the teacher is the guide on the side, students are hopefully reasonably well engaged, teaching is done from teacher to student and student to teacher, student to student, etc. Technology is cautiously adopted. Subjects are busy evolving. This is where we need to work in if we want to prepare Malaysia for the challenges of the future, where technology is everywhere and where knowledge is co-constructed, where everybody is fully engaged and in a culture that recognizes diversions and alternative ways of thinking. And we are still ways off, but I believe that there's hope. I believe that the Trust Schools program can be implemented in different ways. It can be made a much more cost-effective and cost-efficient program. I can say that now. I'm an independent consultant. And I think that Malaysia, with a drive towards change and what the ministry is doing, is fantastic. It needs the people of the country to start believing and supporting and getting involved in the schools. So parents, instead of complaining, go into the school and see what you can do to help make the change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both of you, for some fascinating reports. So I'd like to open the floor for questions. Does anyone have any?
And everybody can just maybe stand up and wake up.
In terms of the sustainability, you go in for 3 to 5 years, and it's really about creating that environment and providing a structure and all the rest of it. But my question is, how does that address in the long term? One of the sustainability issues is that you've still got the same people, and that is maybe where Tengku Azian didn't have the opportunity to talk about what are we doing about the caliber of the teaching profession and the teachers, because you can have all the most wonderful systems and structures in place, but if you're not addressing the key issue, which is the caliber of the teaching profession, which unfortunately tends to be, just to give you an anecdote, I'm from a private school. We took in recently a teacher from a government school, and because her English wasn't that great, she came in as a teaching assistant, and I happened to see her walking in the corridor and said, "Oh, how did your first day go?" And she said, "Yeah, but the teacher wasn't teaching." And I said, "What do you mean?" Because, they were like, she got the teachers to work in groups, and this is just fundamental kind of mindset of someone who'd been a teacher. What are we doing in our IPGs? What are we not sharing collaborative learning? Why is it not taking place? Is it the caliber of the teachers who just can't seem to absorb these very fundamental educational concepts?
I'll give it, and maybe Tengku wants to comment on that as well. I think we shouldn't generalize. Of the thousands of teachers that we are training, I've seen fantastic practice. Teachers come in, and actually the IPGs are changing the approaches and what these students are, equipped with the skills. But often when they go into the school, it's the culture of the school that prevents them from doing the things that they actually would like to do. You want to work in collaborative groups, you arrange your desks, and then the next teacher comes in and says, "Oh, no, why did you change the desk?" Move them back into rows. So sometimes the enthusiasm and the passion disappears. So there are things that the system can do to support the students, the teachers, like having subject-based classrooms where a teacher doesn't have to go around the school teaching in 20 different rooms. Things like reducing the number of preparations they have to do. What you find in most schools is that a teacher would not be the language teacher for Form 1. They would teach Form 1, Form 2, Form 3, Form 4, Sejarah, whatever else, and at the end of the day end up having 25 preparations. So those skills that they have is not always that easy to implement. And as I said before, there's a culture of fear. So, I'm scared to make a difference. But what we do in the trust schools is we train the teachers. So that is what we do. That's the key element. It's changing the belief systems. It's changing the systems. It's empowering, enabling. But at the same time, I do agree with you that there needs to be more that is done around in the system, aligning expectations, aligning understanding. But that is, I think there are amazing public school teachers out there. But, it is about teaching.
Maybe I'll just show a couple of slides. I think you all seen this slide. Okay, a teacher can make a real big difference in the student outcome. The reality is that you said, what are we doing in our IPG? And I think they appointed Alton and they conducted a study on transforming our IPG. But the reality is that 60% of our teachers are going to be in the system, because a lot of them are young compared to some countries like Austria, Italy, where the teachers are close to retirement. So it's very, very important that our teachers are assessed and they're held accountable for their performance. And I'm not sure if it's the right word, because you mentioned that teachers are in a constant state of fear. That's not from the system, right? From multiple fronts. But they have introduced this year the unified instrument, and it's an amalgamation of multiple assessment instruments for teachers. And the idea, very simply, is that they will put teachers in 3 categories. That we have the teachers that are
sort of performing, according to plan, and then there are high performers that should, as you mentioned, should be given the opportunity to move much faster rather than go through every layer according to procedure. And we also have very low performing teachers that we need to do something about. And the idea is that the low performing teachers will undergo a professional program to address their shortcomings, and if they continue to be underperforming, they should be exited from the school system. Now, the unified instrument has gone through a 2-year trial. And actually we wanted to use last year data to be the first year where we will start tracking teachers, and after 3 years, if we find a teacher that is underperforming, we will exit the teacher or redeploy the teacher. But we found out that in last year's assessment, 90% of teachers are classified as excellent. So we knew we had a problem. We knew we had a problem, and we looked at the data a bit deeper, and we find that a lot of teachers, they're just not used to this idea of performance assessment, and so a lot of them were, understandably, were inflating their performance, and we do that even in our own companies. And you always need to have a moderator that will sort of put it right and create a bell curve and all that. But that will happen this year, because we said it cannot be. We informed the ministry folks. It cannot be 90% of teachers are excellent. So this year we start. The first year we're going to do this and implement the instrument in the right way, in the way that we have envisaged it under the blueprint. And then 2016 is the second year, and 2017 is the third year. So after 3 years, 2018, we should start seeing teachers either being redeployed or be exited. But as I always mention in this sort of education talks, I'm not quite sure what will happen in 2018. In the blueprint, it says there should be an exit strategy, but I'm not sure. But I have been saved. I have been saved. I'll skip this. Because on 23rd November, the Chief Secretary came out with a circular, and I'm not sure whether you all are aware, of an exit policy for civil servants. Just recently. And it says that their performance on the civil service assessment is called LNPT. Must be, if it's 60% and lower, they must take action. But of course there is an appeal process and all that. And I read the fine print, there's an exit process. And I was talking to a Secretary General today, and she said, we know who are the non-performers, Azian, but we feel kasihan. Right? We feel sorry for them. They have families, they have, children. What do we do? And I said, sometimes you need to do the hard thing. Because who are we sacrificing? We are sacrificing our rakyat, our people. We're sacrificing our students because we feel sorry for some of these underperforming teachers or civil servants. So call me cruel, but I was sort of telling her you got to do the hard stuff. And she said, with this circular, it doesn't look that that I can kasihan so much. But some data. This was in 2014. MOE set up a very strict criteria for admission into IPG. They said only the top 30% of students, or students minimum of 5 A's in SPM, can apply to IPG. 53,337 applied to become teachers. Because I think some of them still think that it's an easy job. It's half day and you have lots of leave. I'm not sure. But but teachers are paid reasonably well. They're the second highest paid civil service. They are. They are. I know something they are paid well. I don't know. Maybe you can confirm or deny. But the ministry accepted 2,259 out of 53,000 applicants, and you can see that 99.8% of them have got 5 A's. But of that group, at least 22% got 9 A's and above. So we are getting in good teachers into the system. But don't forget, 60% will continue to be in the system for the next 20 years. So we must stop that.
I just want to add, in the trust schools, one of the autonomies that the trust schools have is actually of the 2 cycles of performance management. And that is something that's really being done well in the trust schools, very robustly. Teachers, if they don't improve after 2 cycles, can be moved out of the trust schools Unfortunately, they're not moved out of the system, they're just moved into other schools. But at least we can protect the trust schools. So that is something, but I agree with you. That's the thing is, even if you look at the percentage of teachers with 5 A's, have they got the thinking skills? Have they got the critical thinking skills and creative thinking skills? Because the examination is still very much based on rote learning and memorization. So that is part of the problem. Teachers also don't like the trust schools in the beginning. They don't like it. They want to be transferred because they say that's hard work, so much extra work, because they have to prepare every day and have to have lesson plans and have to do all this extra stuff.
Does that, sorry, I just wanted to ask one part. Does that go back then to teacher training in colleges and what's being taught in the colleges? Does that need to be changed as well?
Well, I would move for saying that all teachers in teaching colleges need to learn about the brain, need to learn about emotional intelligence, need to know about have the practical research-based action research, and most definitely, but at the same time, they need to go into a supportive environment that allows them to implement what they've learned.
Have a question?
I apologize, I haven't read the blueprint, but I was curious, is the ministry looking at student assessment continue to be driven by external final exams, or is there a shift toward more assessment, for learning assessment as learning? And if there is, then in fact, in my mind, that would shift teaching and what happens in classrooms. So I'm just curious on how rigid the final exam approach is going to remain in the country in the next 10 years.
I think Elmarie can perhaps add more, but all I know is that we have 2 national examinations, with the UPSR, which is the primary, and then we have the SPM, the high school. Right? But the 15-year-old exam, that used to be national exams, is now school-based, and I think the system is still adjusting to it, because it's so used to sort of assess students to national exams, and now that you give it to the schools and say, you do the assessment, we have quite an interesting situation. I met this parent that said, my daughter did very well in math UPSR, and now she's in Form 3, she's done really badly under the school-based assessment. And there's something wrong with the system. And I turned to him and I said, you know what, that's probably where your daughter is, the school-based assessment. Is it at UPSR because I'm not sure what is done, and the bell curve and all that, the standard, what do you call it, standard setting or standard fixing? I mean, the performance of that child is based on how the cohort performs. So if the cohort performs not very well, an A could be as low as 60%. But school-based assessment is fixed, and A is at 90% and above. So it's more reflective of the child's performance. But that doesn't answer your question. I mean, the other thing the Ministry of Education is doing is that it's introducing more high-order thinking questions into national assessments. And again, parents are alarmed, because they're saying, my kids are not getting 8s. Every time there's a national exam, results come out, you hear parents writing in and say, what's happening, They're grading my kids too hard, So I think parents, you have to be prepared for a new regime. A new regime where your kids are not going to leave school with 10 A's or 9 A's, and because they need to use other skills, not just memorizing and reproducing that and going through past 10 years papers, but they must be able to understand the concept and apply it, because the question, you cannot try to read the question based on 10 years past year papers, and the teachers cannot teach the test so easily anymore with high order thinking skills now incorporated in public examinations.
I think it's what we found in the 150 schools plus schools that have been working in now is that the system changed, but the teachers aren't ready for it. and the parents don't believe it. So I think those two things are essential. But teachers, I remember when I came to Malaysia 5 years ago, the first presentation I did at the ministry spoke about assessment for learning. There wasn't much awareness actually even in the country at that stage. We introduced the principles of assessment for learning in the trust schools, sharing success criteria, and sometimes Nazir would go in and say, why are you doing this? What is this success criteria? Why are you doing this? It's not, so things have changed, and it's changing rapidly, but the system needs to catch up. Teachers still don't understand concepts of self-assessment, peer assessment, really observation of students, really getting that kind of different approach and implementing assessment for learning as on a regular basis.
Any more questions?
Can I make an observation? I think our attempt to make teachers improve. I've been teaching most of my life. One of my graduates, working for something. You also must, I think it's going to school, you hope to get not so good teachers, make them better. I think the intervention will be a lot easier. We make those teachers who are fairly good already. Like you say, there are good teachers around. I believe that in every grouping, there will always be 10% who are very good, 20%. Make those who are good understand the brain, and then they will improve further. And by example, hopefully their own colleagues will follow. They become the role models for the school. So the intervention will be a lot easier if you look at the top 30%, rather than look at the really bottom and try to make them better.
Yeah.
Having said that, one of the biggest fears we are facing is the good ones are getting disillusioned. I used to teach, but when I took up administrative job, my teaching dropped. So 70% of the performance of education, school and class has a lot to do with the teacher. You better give the teacher more time to teach and prepare. If you load them with administrative work, definitely the teaching will decline. That's my comment.
Could you introduce yourself, sir?
Good evening, my name is Elmarie. I'm from one of the private sector training center. The thing that I like to find from here is because I notice, with due respect, our education system is a yo-yo system. Malaysian education system is always swing from left to right, based on political feedback. And with due respect to Pemandu again, I think Pemandu is basically a lab who try to create some guinea pig out of something, which I am not so sure whether how good they are. With due respect to that, even my good friend Richard is there. The thing is, why I'm saying that, when I noticed that they all came out with our honorable chief secretary said that they want to measure the performance of KPI. KPI is also subject to abuse. I wonder how they will measure the teacher. But teaching is something very subjective. And having said that, once upon a time when I was a young boy, we do have part self-assessment system. I do remember correctly because I was very lucky. I was always a good book of teacher. And we have an oral exam for MCE in English. Some of my good friends who are very naughty, the teacher never liked them, they always bad book. They speak very good English, all of them fail the oral exam, and they don't even get one. And the teacher herself have a sister who are in the same school, same year but different class, at the back of class. She did very well in the oral because her own sister is an English teacher who did the oral to us. I mean, the biasness is there. So when you comment about the PMR, when you do that, they don't get A on this, that triggered my mind that the biasness has been set in. I wonder how the education department will able, or even Pemandu concerned, to identify the human weakness of biasness. What I'm just related is a real case I went to. I came from a very good school, but they have such a teacher. Not to mention him, maybe the teacher already expired by now, I'm not so sure. The thing is, you see, I look at, that's why I'm saying is, we as a Malaysian, we are very concerned about education policy. Once somebody shout, you change to Malay because they say English, tak boleh lah kita orang Melayu. So we fail badly. Then after somebody shouts that English is an international language because you have to learn science and English. Okay, now we go back to that. So we have been changing English, Malay from science and maths. I don't know how many times I lost count, honestly. So I wonder, I'd like to put to the panel, how does our government to check KPI of teacher when they say all this kasian, all this and that? I doubt they can do anything, with due respect. Thank you.
I think your point is very valid, because when we had the town hall with the schools that tentatively identified the DLP, they said exactly that, let's not have yo-yo policies, and you have every right to have that point, because we introduced English should be the compulsory part in SPM, then we postponed that decision, and we had PPSMI, we reversed it, when we introduced DLP. One of the reasons I like to put on record, Pemandu did not come up with the DLP idea. We called, and I think even the trust school, we called Yayasan Amir, it was actually MOE. And ideas were there, H were there, Yayasan Amir, TFM were there, and even I think some people from KDU, Sunway, they were all invited. They came up with the idea. We facilitated the discussion, because if we don't facilitate the discussion, it will go nowhere. There'll be 10 people talking in this one room, and then the idea, we had to crystallize that idea and develop that idea to a very granular level. So that was our job. But basically what the lab people were saying, look, we are at the soft landing of PPSMI. A lot of schools, like the Methodist, principal Methodist school said, I'm at the soft landing. Since 2003, I've been teaching math and science in English. But with the reversal of the policy, it's going to be phased out. What am I going to do? I have capable teachers in the system. Principal wants it. Parents want it. And that's why the DLP came out. Is to say schools that are soft landing can continue to do so by re-entering through this program called DLP. And we do it differently, because the Malay nationalists will say, now the students, because of PPSMI, the students not only can't speak English, they can't even learn math and science, because they're learning in a language they're not comfortable with. The teachers can't teach. Instead of saying 5 minus 3, the teacher says 5, what do you call it? Push 3 or something like that. So to address that, we said, let's open DLP and do it slowly. Schools that are in the soft landing can immediately do it, because they have been doing it since 2003. Schools that are not ready can prepare for it. Schools that totally don't want it can continue to do it in BM. So the point of choice comes into play. And empowering the school, talking to the parents, talking to the community to see how they can help to make that choice for the school. And in the school, you can have a ratio of Malay and English. Those subjects being taught in that 2 languages can have a ratio of 100% in English, or 100% in Malay, or 80-20, 70-30, 50-50, depending on what you have in the school. So it's a different model, but we did assure, MOE did assure to the teachers and principals that we are really dead serious about it. We want you to come out in support of it. We want you to help make sure that noises are kept down. It is not a political decision. It was a decision by the lab members that comprise of civil society, essentially, and MOE folks and ordinary people like you and me.
Believe that a change is possible. I think that's important. Believe that it is possible. And if we keep on looking back to the past, we're never going to make a change. But I think what Tengku is saying is so important. We've seen this in the trust schools, I've seen this in the Emirates, I've seen this in South Africa, been working in these projects for so long. It is when the community buys in, it's when they share decision making, it's when people are given a voice. That's when the change has more chance of succeeding. So we've just got to put our support and see how we can help and how we can make a difference. So I might sound very idealistic, but it is really so important that everybody says, what can I do to help?
Any more questions? Yes.
I just had a question on the cost. You mentioned that it could be done. The Trust School program could be done at a more cost-efficient rate. So, where and how do you think this can happen?
Well, one of the things that I believe will, because a lot of the cost of the Trust School is the cost of the external advisors who are appointed. We appoint international and local advisors to work in the schools. I think there's an opportunity to work with the ministry and to have some attachment of existing staff and some of these strong teachers, curriculum, people in the school attached to the program to help build capacity, and that would push costs down. There's also the opportunity of creating satellite schools around the Trust schools so that the established schools then become the trainer or the training center for schools around. And the training then happens through collaborative networks, through exchange of teachers. I think there are many, if the system, if we can work with the ministry, I think there are ways in which that could really be reduced. And of course, introducing an element of a flipped classroom or blended learning could also help, where teachers then could learn some of the practices online, providing videos, short videos that model good practice, interactive online learning also, so that you reduce the cost of the physical intervention or the full-time presence of people in the school. But I think getting the existing Trust schools to become hubs for new Trust schools around them is one way of very quickly accelerating the change.
I think I didn't answer the question. I think you had a very good point about teachers now bogged down by having to do data entry and administrative work. I've heard this numerous times, so maybe it's something we need to study. It's my 2016 work. But meanwhile, while that study is ongoing, I might do lectures on that or just get somebody to look into that. Follow a teacher, a couple of teachers in the country for one whole week and see how many % of their time is spent doing administrative work, how many % of their time is actually teaching in the classroom and present it to MOE. But meanwhile, well, that is before that happens. Now I think the DLP, they hit what we're saying is that we recognize the 4 important constellations, which is mentioned, where the student is the center to that. The other 3 parts, components of principal, teacher, parents, and community. But I think now with HIT and DLP, we're saying, look, let the school community work out how they're going to implement it, and let them talk to the parents to see how they want to do this. I think when it comes to all that data entry, that maybe part of that conversation is that how maybe we can get some retired parents or grandparents to come and help in the classroom. You were saying, right? No, really. Every time I read in the papers, we Malaysians, and we have good reasons to whinge and all that, but maybe it's about time we say, how can I contribute in the school that my child is, or the school my grandchild is, and see how we can lift the burden off the shoulders of the teachers, and until the government comes up with a proper plan to address the issue on data entry. But yeah, I think it's something that I will certainly look at.
I think another thing that will help, as I've mentioned before, is when the schools plan their timetables, think about how they are using teachers. So give teachers fewer preparations to do. Let teachers collaborate. That's another thing that I think is not happening enough of. You find in a school there are 4 teachers teaching English for Form 1 or for Form 2. They don't share the planning. Each one's doing their own thing. If you start working and forming collaborative networks, and that's where the online element comes in, share the planning, share the resources, share the good learning, so that you reduce the burden that's on the individual teachers. But I can say in 2011, we did a study, and at that stage there were 52 different data collection systems in use. So the systems don't talk to one another. The schools have to enter the data for the curriculum in one session, him's got to do attendance on another one, and discipline goes there, and these marks go on this system, and that one goes there, and teachers are expected to, you go into a school and there's a room full of files, but nobody opens the files, but the paperwork is there, so where do we put our attention? But immediately, I think if you just change how am I using my teachers, give them fewer preparations, put the periods together instead of having a period of math in the morning and a period of math in the afternoon, create block time. All these are small little strategies that can immediately be implemented. Doesn't require ministry permission. It just requires the community in the school to think, how can we make it better? And let's work together. Get that. But one of the things, and I'm sorry, but you go into a school, there's no staff room. Teachers go, they have a staff room, but the staff room is a desk where they sit and mark. But they don't meet together as a staff. And I remember when I was a principal, I met every morning, 7:15, my teachers had to be seated, and we talked together about what are we going to do, what are we focusing on, raising issues, sharing ideas. And that is something that will also help bond the school together and reduce the administrative burden, I think, on teachers and involve parents. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. Hello, just taking the microphone.
Hello, my name is May, and I want to thank the speakers for sharing with us today. Taking on what you've just said, even in the presentation as well as in the Q&A session, I like what you mentioned about involving the community, the parents particularly, in supporting this transformation. Yeah, and education being a very long-term process, my question is, how do you, well, I think one of the main problem is that you're doing good work, or at least the start of good work that we can see in your projects, but how do you let Malaysian parents know about it in order for them to get involved? You want your grandparents, to come and help out, your parents to come and do your reading. I think that's a very good example, picture that you show us. But half of the Malaysian, or maybe 3/4 of the Malaysian parents are shaking their head, and all they can do is complain, like, what are we doing about this? What is the government doing? What is the ministry doing? But they do not know. So how do you manage this perception? How do you change their perception so that you can enroll them or persuade them to come and partner with you, with educationists, with schools, in order to build the school together? As you say, it takes a village to build or to educate the child. So is something being done about this, or is it in your plan that you're going to do for this? Yeah. So please share with us. Thank you.
But something very interesting happened when we did the roadshow to the targeting the 300 shortlisted dual language schools. They invited the principal of every DLP school and the head of PIBG in a room like this, and then presented it. So a lot of questions came from the head of PIBG, and after that I actually spoke to some of them, and one of them came up to me and said, my school nearly didn't make it to this. And I said, why? Because the principal didn't want to do it. I said, no, I don't want to do it. We literally went and sort of arm-twisted the principal to say, we will help the school because we want DLP for our kids. And then I said, oh, wonderful. So the ministry had started that process. So they just finished the roadshow in Kuching and Sabah over the weekend. But those are DLP 300 schools, and they will be announced this week. The HIP as well will involve the community. We have reached out to Sunway and all the lots of universities, KDU, Sunway, IMU, in fact all the public universities through Ministry of Higher Education. We said we want students to go into the HIP schools and help with the HIP activities, because there are some schools. Let's say there's a school Rembau, principal can only speak mainly in BM, teachers use BM, the students come from families where the mother tongue is BM. How are you going to roll out HIP in that school? No matter how motivated the principal is, because he wouldn't even know where to start. So we're getting university graduates to help. So we also spoke yesterday to Dr. Yunus, who did the revolution in Tamil schools. Have you heard of him, Dr. Yunus? And Asti? 13 years ago, Dr. Yunus, who got a PhD from Cambridge, came up and said, he started with Tamil schools because he only got funding from Ananda Krishnan Foundation. So he had no choice but to go to Tamil schools. He wanted to start in Sekolah Kebangsaan, he couldn't get a single cent from MOE. He still hasn't got a single cent from MOE, by the way. So he started with Tamil schools, but over 13 years, you can go to his website. He was just creating excitement in science among Tamil students. And Tamil schools are doing so well in mathematics and science in national exams. And in fact, if you put DLP there, they're going to be ahead of SK and Sekolah Jenis Kebangsaan Cina. In fact, you never know. One day Tamil schools will turn out to be English medium schools. You never know. This is the revolution. I'm telling you all now. We'll see 10 years from now. But we approached him and he said, you've done so well with Tamil schools, they're winning all these big competitions in Beijing, South Korea, London, blah, blah. Can we do the same thing with HIP? It's an activity, a HIP activity, but involving 100 schools, but we use science to interest the students. He said, yes, I need 400 volunteers. So if any one of you want to volunteer, I need 400 volunteers to spend and handhold these kids on science, on a science program for these 100 schools. And you don't need to know much about science. You just need to have a little bit of fundamentals in science. But more importantly, your role in the school is to motivate the teachers. Because the teachers will say, I can't do it. He said, the biggest problem, a lot of teachers say, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. I'm scared. And apparently the role of the volunteers is to say, you can do it. You're wonderful. Great, let's just do it. And a lot of the experiments that they do in school use basic things. You don't have to even go very far. Use a plastic bottle like this. You take leaves, just from around, on the compound. And very simple things. You don't have to buy sophisticated robotics to do all these science experiments. You don't even need a lab. So we are talking, I'm going out to this forum to tell parents, please go and engage your PIBGs, please talk to the schools. The schools knows about HIP, the school knows about DLP, the PPDs, they know about it, the JPN knows about it. This is the time we need to ignite the revolution. I don't mind you using the word, revolution among parents to help the schools in our country, yeah?
I think another thing that you need to do, and that's what we do what's done in trust schools, is one of the 4 strategic goals, and schools are given a target for parent engagement. So they are compelled to, they have to involve the parents, and then you support them with ideas of how to do it. So if I know that my parent engagement is this is the number of parents that's come, I've got a target, I know what my starting target is, and I know what I've got to achieve over 5 years, so I have to do it. Sometimes also helps. Not that you want to push things down on schools, but once they realize also what the changes that happens, and I've got a small anecdote in Johor, a small little school in a palm plantation, 60% attendance of students in the school. At the end, they now stand at the national, very close to the national benchmark of 95%. How did they do it? The principal stood at the gate every morning. When the students came with the parents, shake their hand and say, congratulations, you made it. And, making the parents feel welcome. A school in Sarawak, also very, very poor socioeconomic circumstances. Parents have to walk 40 minutes in the morning with their children to get to school. Then they'd sit around and wait until the school comes out and walk back with the little children. So they encourage to say, well, hey, you've got this crowd outside the gate. Bring them in. Give them roles. Give them a uniform. Give them a badge. Give them a sense of responsibility. And boy, did this change that community. But of course, the school also knows that they are recognized for the work that they've done. So they have to bring parents in and children. And you know what? You do things. You have competitions. The class with the most parents at the Parents' Day get a trip So suddenly you get all these parents in the school because the children become your change agents, and the parents say, hey, hang on a minute, it's actually nice going into the school because the school plan, they talk about my child. I get an opportunity to participate. I have a voice. Regular questionnaires, surveys, getting them to give their voice, to get the regular feedback with their children. So there are ways in which we can do it. But we have to hold the schools accountable as well. It can't just be, let's do it and encourage them. I think once they know they've got a target and their targets, and when they achieve it, it's celebrated, that's when you start seeing the change happening.
Okay, well, we've run out of time, I'm afraid, so thank you everyone for coming. I think we had some really interesting presentations and interesting discussion. So if we could thank our two guests.